Our eFocus series webinars are designed to cover relevant topics once a month throughout the year to really help you maximize your software investment for the Razor's Edge. I'll introduce you again to Allison Watts. She is our fundraising practice manager at Capital Business Solutions. She has over 20 years of practical experience as both a fundraising professional and donor management services consultant. In a variety of settings. 9 of those years she has spent in a director of development capacity, so she knows the ins and outs of what you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, plus all the technical expertise. In 2006, really, Allison transitioned into her current consulting role and has worked really closely with a wide range of nonprofits. So as a reminder, too, wanted to let you know you can use the chat feature in your GoToMeeting sidebar to send over any questions as we are going through the webinar, and we'll respond as appropriate as we're going through the content. I'll be kind of monitoring that as we're going along. We are also recording the webinar, and I will be able to make that available to you probably by the end of this week, along with a copy of the content from the PowerPoint as well. So I will go ahead and let Allison take it away.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. So yeah, we'll get started. So this time of year is a really good time for a lot of us to set intentions, to make resolutions about how we're going to be better at whatever it is we're doing in the coming year. So for Razor's Edge users, sometimes that means cleaning up data, performing maintenance, or maybe you just have come through the end of your calendar year, which is also the end of the fiscal year or end of a big campaign, and you say to yourself, this has to be easier. I'm going to set some standards for this coming season, this coming campaign, this coming year, so that closing it out at the end will be easier, better, reporting will be faster, or we just have learned from some growing pains and know better how to do some things now. So I want to discuss some tips today for helping you keep those promises to yourself or to your colleagues. And again, as Andy said, maximize your investment, but also make your day-to-day lives easier for using the Razor's Edge. So, like I say, you may already be doing these maintenance tasks. This is not a presentation about what data cleanup and maintenance tasks are good to do at this time of year. We covered that at one point last year, so you might look at the archive presentations for that. But we can touch on a few, and by all means, if there is a particular data issue relative to cleanup or setting good standards, by all means put that in a chat question, and we'll get to that at the end. But this is more about once you have done those cleanup tasks, or once you have, for example, run the deduplicate utility, how do you keep your data consistent, and how do you keep that data integrity high on a daily basis? So how can we keep those good habits going year-round? One of the most obvious things may be to change the security settings so that each user has the ability to do just the things that are necessary to his or her daily work. So not everyone should have supervisor rights or rights to change things like fund or campaign records or table entries. And you might even have more stringent security settings for your organization where only certain people enter new records or only certain people can enter new gifts. Or maybe different data sets can be locked down so that some people change phone numbers but not addresses. So all of this is possible with the security settings, and now is a good time to review that. Of course, always if there's some event, as in a user or new staff coming on or leaving, it's a good time to evaluate security settings. But also, sometimes security settings can be changed without you realizing it. Important to note that when you download a .upgrade, maybe a new feature is implemented for the Razor's Edge that has security settings that go along with it. Or maybe you just adopted one of the optional modules. So you have just recently acquired events or volunteers. And that didn't exist before, so there's now a new area in security that users can or can't access. And by the way, when you get a new feature, I'm almost 100% sure that the practice from Blackbaud is to allow all users access to that feature. So you would need, as a database administrator, to go in and take that access away if not everyone needs to manage the events area. Maybe that's just your events person or whatever the case may be. So good times to review security when a new user comes on or off line, and when there are any changes in the software, an upgrade in the version or a new module or a new feature. And so you just see here the area for events, and as you know, go back a slide, users can be in a group or not. So Bonnie is a supervisor. She is not in a group, but most people would be in a group, and then this is what the group itself looks like. So you can enable or disable a user's access to the areas that you see listed. And so when a user goes offline, they leave the organization or they go into a different role and don't need the same access as before, or maybe they're not using Razor's Edge, simple to make them inactive by just taking them out of any group, but not making them a supervisor. This keeps the record of Bonnie in this case, and any records that she created would still have the stamp of her name, or queries or reports would still exist with the stamp of her name, but she herself could not log in anymore. She would log into a blank shell, for example. So that's the practice for kind of keeping on top of your users. And I mentioned deduplicating the database. This is a high priority or need for a lot of organizations, or risk, for lack of a better word, for organizations that duplicate records get added. So as you may know, there is a tool under administration, under admin, for working through the duplicates and getting rid of them by either merging them together or notifying the system that they're not duplicates, that there really are two people, in this case, named Jill Garrett. Those aren't in fact duplicates. So you would work through this tool and this database is really nice and clean. There's only one possible duplicate out of all the thousands of records, and I know that that is not the case in reality. That's only the case with the sample that's created in a warehouse, so to speak. So most people have hundreds, if not thousands, and once you've worked through them and merged them or notified the system that they're not duplicates, you want to be able to avoid adding duplicates in the future. So under config business rules, there are a lot of rules that you can set for the entire system. So these are not user specific, these apply to everyone. And they can set up some behind the scenes dependencies or tasks that can sort of keep everyone honest. In this case, I've gone to the second in the list of business rules, the rules for duplicates, and notice that everything is checked, which is good, because I want all users to be reminded if they're entering a new record with the last name of Smith that there could be other records named Smith with the name of Smith in the system. So if I run a search for constituents when saving a new record, then a dialog box will pop up saying, you may be entering a duplicate record, so be extra sure, review your work, and you can choose to save the record or back out and go to the existing record and add the new information that you want. So again, this is just an example of a business rule, but reviewing business rules at this time of year is a good idea. Reviewing them on a regular basis is a good idea, and this is as good a time as any when you're sort of thinking about these kinds of things. Again, business rules can change with a dot upgrade, so it's a good thing to remember to review from time to time. And because it's behind the scenes and you might not go to the configuration area very often, it's something you might not think about. So put it in a tickler file or put an appointment in your Outlook to review business rules and security on a regular basis. Again, sort of a cleanup task that you might be doing on an ongoing basis is deactivating records. Again, the turn of the year, calendar year, or the fiscal year is a great time to review this to see if there are table entries or campaigns, funds, or appeals or attributes that can be made inactive. This is very simple. It doesn't really change anything about the configuration of your data or certainly the information that's on constituent records, but it makes old values inaccessible to apply to new records. So if you have an attribute, for example, that's the screenshot you're seeing here, under config, again, attributes, you're seeing attributes for constituents, and then these are the options that we have in this particular database. Notice there's an active column, so easy to just tick a box and say these are no longer active. So the last three, no longer active, no longer accessible for new record entry. So any new records or any existing records could not have this attribute added if they didn't have it prior to your, excuse me, making it inactive. So any attributes you have that might be dated, you know, like this year's Giving Society. If those change from year to year, then you would make this year's inactive as an attribute and update next year's. So similar for campaigns, funds, and appeals. Campaigns and appeals especially are dated and need to be changed, rotated from year to year. Funds, sometimes too. Sometimes funds are more static. But again, easy to go to records and then choose the appropriate area, either campaigns or appeals. I've chosen campaign here, and it's no longer 2016. That campaign has ended. We're well into February, so it might be safe to say that you're not going to get gifts to this campaign anymore, that you would backdate. So safe timing-wise to go ahead and deactivate it. All you have to do is tick the box next to campaign is inactive. You can still report on this campaign. You can still see it in the list of campaign records if you were choosing it for a query or a report, but you can't add a new gift into the 2016 campaign after it's made inactive. So again, a good housekeeping tip, good housekeeping time to add new records that to replace the ones you're making inactive. But it also is a good data integrity move because if people doing data entry have the options available to them that they need, then there won't be any question about what to do, and there won't be a rush to create new records at a time when you might be busier or more under the gun. You know, your big spring gala is underway, and thankfully registrations are pouring in. So, you know, set up the event, the appeal, the fund, whatever's needed, so your data entry people can roll with it once those gifts start coming in. And you can do it at a time when it's easier and more less stressful for you. Events in particular are nice to, or there is a nice feature that you can use to copy one from the other. So if you open the current year's event or the 2016 event, whether it's a dinner, a golf tournament, whatever the case may be, if it's an annual event and almost everything will be the same for the coming year, open the existing record or the last year's record and go to the event tab in the toolbar, the menu in the toolbar, and pull it down and choose copy event, which will take everything from that event, the details, the pricing, the units, the your tables or your sponsor levels, the date. So if it's the same date, same weekend, year to year, then you could just change the year for the dates. So everything will be copied over into a new record except participants. So those you would have to add either globally or one at a time as they start to register. But it can be a very nice time and accuracy saving step to copy from instead of having to create new. Also, you can take some of the question or decision making out of either your hands if you're doing data entry, or your mind, take it off your mind at the crisis point when it's coming in by making things required. Or if you're not doing data entry and it's another area or another individual who manages that, then you can put some restrictions on it to help make it easier for them and better for everyone, so that there are not so many options. So going to the config area of Razor's Edge and then choosing fields, you'll see areas for all the basic data sets in Razor's Edge. And keep in mind that we're always looking at a sample, so I have all the modules in this sample, and yours may not look the same. You might not have quite as long a list here. But I've gone to fields and then fields for constituent, and so this is consistent for all of you. These are all the fields that you might see, for example, on Bio 1. These are constituent-related fields for individuals and organizations. And then for this, so name, last name is always required. That's required by the system, by the installation. But I've added constituent code and nickname and title, Mr. or Ms., for individuals. And then org name is required for organizations. That's a required requirement. That's in every system. But I've added, because for this system, constituent code is important. I don't want to have a record entered and be allowed to be saved without having the constituent code added. So that's what these required checkboxes do. They make that data set required before a new record can be saved. You see a pop-up box and then you add it and you go about your business. So any of the fields that you see or the sets that you see here have fields related to them, and any of those fields can be made required. So just be mindful that you're not making everything required so that it takes time to takes time away, or it adds time rather to your data entry staff. And also that you're not making so many fields required that you end up with table clutter. So you might get fields added, values added to your tables that you weren't intending, like unknown or unspecified. So unless a field is truly required, leave it as optional. But if it's important for you, it's required, it's critical for you, then you can make it so a user has to use it. You also can see in the options across the top of the field screen, you see, here's where we were looking at required. There's also one called lookup. It's behind this orange arrow, but lookup means that this is a drop-down. When you're in the front-facing part of the database, you would see a drop-down for, in this case, country or county. And you can turn on some fields that aren't lookup fields, that don't have a drop-down, that don't require you to choose from a list instead of typing free text. Most of the time you probably don't want to do that, but city in the address lines or in the address part of the record is one that you might want to do that for. So if you check the city box, or the box for lookup next to city, what Razor's Edge will do is scan your entire database, look at the field for city on all the records that exist, and populate a table out of all of those city names. So you might get a mess to start with in that table. For example, I live in Winston-Salem. There are like 4 or 5 legitimate ways to spell that out, with a dash, a hyphen, or without, with a space, in addition to possible misspellings. So the first time you do this, you might have a cleanup job on your hands. So weigh if it's going to be easier for you to clean that up and create a drop-down, and then that to provide that consistency for data entry, as opposed to the time it will take for you to make that possible in the first place. If you don't have a lot of different, if you don't have a high volume of new records, it might not be worth it. But if you do, or if you're finding yourself with a lot of returned mail, or a lot of constituents, donors complaining about the way their address looks on labels, then you might look into it. So sorry, let me scoot ahead. Let me take a look. We'll come back to the data audits, but I wanted to talk about sorry, I think I got some out of order. Here we go. Speaking of creating a table out of the city field, and maybe getting a mess at first, I wanted to talk about cleaning up tables. So the table cleanup utility is there for you if you have access to it, if you have security for it, under config and tables, and then it's a command button in the toolbar there by the arrow. And for almost all of the tables that exist, you can use the table cleanup utility to replace duplicates or misspellings. So feasibly, you might think that my example of Winston-Salem with a dash, Winston-Salem with a space, you want those to be the same. I could use this cleanup to say, put everything with a dash in this first box to be replaced, and then replace it with Winston-Salem with a space. That's a nice idea. Like I said, that works for 95% of the tables, but the city table is one that I created out of my database instead of What usually happens is you start with the table and then you add records that have those values. So since you're going in the opposite direction, you can't use table cleanup to clean up a city table. You have to do it sort of the old-fashioned way. So in this example, in the sample database, I have a Yellow Spring and a Yellow Springs, the first two cities in the table that you see in the screenshot. So I just need to create a query where the city equals Yellow Spring. That's the one I don't want. And when you're choosing the criteria for the city, you want all addresses instead of preferred address, which you might usually choose when you're querying for mailing lists and whatnot. That's the Bio 1 address. But if you're really wanting to clean up the system, you have to get Yellow Spring, the bad city name, out of all records, including inactive addresses. So searching for all addresses, city equals Yellow Spring. And then fortunately, I only have 2 to change, so I would just drill into the query and change manually Yellow Spring to Yellow Springs. Important to go back to the table and take Yellow Spring out by deleting it. You can't delete an item from a table as long as it exists on a record, which is why I say delete the bad city names from all addresses, not just active addresses or preferred addresses. So, sorry, I'm going to back up a little. Look away if you don't want to get dizzy. And here we go. So just a few suggestions on maybe sort of locking down certain fields or giving your data entry people, or all users really, some parameters to work in. So they don't have to always be making the decisions about what's the right value to use when only the values that are active are available. Or which fields do I fill in? Well, the ones that are required. So also making fields required is handy or useful when something's not front and center. For example, a lot of organizations like to track the county for address. So it's not right on the Bio 1 screen. You have to click a few times to get to county. So that's important for your organization. You might make it required, and then that serves as a great reminder to data entry people, making it easy really for everyone to keep good habits. But that doesn't always happen because we're all human. So how can you kind of keep on top of these things before it becomes critical or stressful, like the day before you're sending out a big mailing or as a big event's approaching? So setting up some audits that you can run on a weekly or monthly basis, again, depending on the kind of volume that you have for incoming information, will really help save you some time and heartache, because you can address issues as they crop up or before they become critical or problematic. So you can create some simple queries as database administrators or managers to, and the example that I use here is just to look at all new records. So if you just want on a regular basis to review all the new records that have been added in the time period, you can see if the addresses are being added fully, or if the fields that you require as an organization are being included. So the simple field to use for that in your query as criteria is the date added. So I've chosen the date added equals this month. So you wouldn't have to change this query ever. You could always use that operator, that criteria, excuse me, but you would have to remember to run it before the month changes. So, 28th, 30th, whatever, remember to run this query, evaluate all the records that were added this month, and then because on the 1st you'll be looking at an empty query. So just remembering to run it at the end of the month. Or you can make the date range manual or specific. So the date range is between January 1st and February 14th. I also added a criteria to this particular example to look at records added by a user. So all records added by Allison Watts this month. So again, if you have different individuals doing data entry as opposed to those who are kind of supervising data, then you could kind of keep track or help those individuals, again, keep their good habits. Especially important if, I don't know, sometimes you have very high volume times and you might enlist people who don't use Razor's Edge all the time, like a temp or a volunteer, and you set up, a very restricted user for them where they don't have the ability to do a lot of damage or access a lot of areas, but then you want to follow on behind them and make sure that the work that they did for you and in that sort of temporary status is accurate and has integrity. So these are some of the things that you might check on a regular basis. And I know I used the example of having sort of decentralized processes, but this is good for a one-person shop as well, because if your eyes are the only ones on the data, then it's easy to get sort of cross-eyed. So setting a time, a day out of the month where you just do review could be helpful as well. Some things that I think are important for everyone to check on: do we have full valid addresses? Are we processing deceased records so that the surviving spouse is treated with respect? Changing the names and not sending mail or making phone calls to asking for deceased people. Some organizations, most organizations use a constituent code, so it's important that all records have those. And again, for mailings and reports, how a person wants their name to be used is critically important for donors. So is that primary addressee salutation there? And again, for constituent code and addressee salutation, you might make those things required. And then you don't have to even do the audit, or the audit is just to check that the correct constituent code is used, not that it's there or not. And then situationally, you may have different audits that you want to perform because you have unique requirements for new data or changes to data. My example of county for address, or if you're a school, you might be sure that the class of field, that O should be capitalized in class of, the class of field is being used and being entered so that you know which year alums belong to. Or you might have required constituent attributes like donor type or giving level or target or something that you want to be sure all records have. And solicitor assignments. Again, some organizations don't want prospects or donors to not have a solicitor, a friend, an individual, a name that they associate, a person that they know at the organization. And then here's just another example. The first one was for all new records, but maybe you want to keep as well a check on changes to existing records. So the query criteria for this one would be, instead of date added, date last changed is this month, or date last change is the specific range, with or without the constituent, sorry, the user last changed by as another query criteria. And then here's an example of a query for records with a gap, records with some lack in information. And this particular one is that they don't have an address. So the address lines are blank, and at the same time, the constituent has not been marked as having no valid address. So the checkbox for no valid address is unchecked, and the criteria is that the address lines are blank. And you could clearly do the same thing with city field or zip code. My example is just address lines. And then to follow up and clean that up, you could perform a global change and check the box for no valid address, or alternatively, maybe you work through that list of records and see what the issue is. Maybe it was a donation that came in through Net Community, and all you have is an email address. So maybe you send an email asking for a mailing address so you can add them to your newsletter list, or whatever the case may be. So you could choose if you want to try to acquire the addresses or just mark the individual as no valid address. And by the way, marking a record as no valid address would not keep them from getting emails if there is a valid email. So you can audit for new records, you can audit for changes to existing records, or you can audit for specific data. This example is that the preferred address has been changed. So just drilling and getting more specific within excuse me, the query criteria. So again, if you have questions or areas that you are finding difficulty with or have trouble keeping integrity in, please throw those out for us in questions, in the questions field or the chat field. These are just some of the ideas that I had about data sets that you might want to check from time to time, keeping on top of. Changes to phone numbers, or that there's a lack. If you have the most recent versions of Razor's Edge, you can set a phone number as preferred or primary, or an email as primary when there are a number of emails on the record. So are those primary settings being used? We talked about zip codes. Maybe if you could query on, audit on a new pledge that was added in the time period to check that the schedule is being set up properly. Same for proposals. If you have the prospect module, are the required fields for proposals being added? Same for actions. If it's your company's, your organization's practice to assign actions to solicitors or to users, then make sure that those fields are selected. And then if you have a recurring gift program, we talked about this a few webinars ago. If you have a regular donors program and people are giving monthly through direct debit or through a saved credit card, you can audit to see when the expiration date for those cards is coming up, so that you could notify the donor and have them update their information with you. So we covered this. So another thing that could be time sensitive or date sensitive or need updating at this time of year is dashboards, our dashboards. And again, this can really help decrease stress with other users, maybe especially those who are more view only and accustomed to looking at their dashboards to get information rather than running queries or running reports. It also can make your life easier as data managers. Again, when you get into a busy time, maybe there's a dashboard for events that managers aren't used to looking at right now because it's a golf tournament in the spring or the fall. But update the dashboard now so that it's available for that person when they need it, and then they can be on top of the information, the data that they need, and that could also make your life easier during that busy time. So go to Dashboards and then open, under the New Dashboard drop-down that you see there, open the dashboard of concern, or the one that needs changing, and then choose Customize. So that pulls up all of the panels available for any one dashboard page, and you can select the options for each report, dashboard report. So this is a summary for campaigns, by campaigns, and one of my first examples in the webinar today was to update the campaign for 2016 and make it inactive. You could still run this dashboard. It would still update because it shows real-time information, but suddenly, after gifts aren't being added to 2016 anymore, or as you see there in that third circle, the date range changes. So the date range for this report is this calendar year. We're now into 2017, and you're going to get nothing as the results, no dollars in the results of this summary, because it's looking at last year's campaign, but this year's date ranges, and feasibly there would be nothing in that. So look at the dashboard customizations, the options for each panel within the customization page, and update any dates to prevent conflicts, to prevent panic from the people who use those dashboards either on a regular basis or on an irregular basis. So when they come back to them, they say, what's wrong here? It also can help prevent users from thinking that there are data integrity problems when there's really just a problem with the report parameters or the dashboard parameters. So you could obviously create a new dashboard panel for the 2017 campaign and make all the changes necessary. Maybe you'd want to keep this 2016 one at the same time so they could compare side by side. If you did that, then you would want to change this calendar year to last calendar year for the 2016 one, and then save it and keep it and create a brand new one for this calendar year looking at the 2017 campaign. So other sort of defaults that you might want to examine on a regular basis, especially an annual basis, to make things easy for your users, help make it easy for them to keep good habits, is to look at any user defaults that you use. Or if you don't know or aren't aware of user defaults, then this is a great way, again, of making it easy for people to use good habits, to not have to make decisions in the moment about what's required or what's our particular practice. So if you go through the main shell of Razor's Edge, the main window, to Tools and Organize Create Defaults, then you see the screen that you see here with individuals, organizations, actions, etc. So these are all the possible fields that you can, or data sets that you can set defaults for. Mostly you would have individuals, like, again, if county is required as part of the address and you're in Mecklenburg County and 80% of your constituency is from Mecklenburg County, then you could default Mecklenburg County in for all new records that were entered. We're looking in the screenshot at defaults for gifts, so you have just different default sets for the different events or the different kinds of giving or um, uh, maybe high volume times of giving with gifts, and they have different defaults for them. So the walkathon might have a default for the particular fund that those gifts go into, or date ranges, or what have you. So just looking at those, reviewing if there's anything that needs to change or be created for user defaults to make record management easy for everyone. So if I've changed and deactivated the 2016 campaign and someone tries to enter a new gift for the golf tournament, it's going to default to that inactive campaign, and then that person won't be able to save the gift. So we'll create some frustration. Go ahead and head that off at the pass by changing the defaults before that gift entry time rolls around. And by the same token, updating batch templates. If you use batch for data entry, go ahead and change any dates or fund or campaign defaults that would use a deactivated field or need an update. So those are the ideas that I had about helping everyone keep good habits as you go throughout the year, not just letting those New Year's resolutions come up and fall by the wayside. Start collecting dust like the, I don't know, stair climber you got for Christmas, whatever the case may be. So helping everyone keep on top of their own data and the database as a whole, so that it will keep functioning for you during the slow times, during the busy times, and throughout the year.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Allison, for all that great content. A lot out there today. So we still have a few minutes left in our allotted window for the webinar. So if anybody has any questions or wants to shoot those over, we can answer those while we're still here. Feel free to just use that chat window again. We'll kind of keep it open for about 2 minutes or so, and then we will wrap everything up. Let's see, I think I see one. Let's take a quick look here. Nope, I guess that question went away, so never mind. Got about 1 minute left if anybody has any questions and wants to take the opportunity to get a chance to have Allison here for another couple minutes. Feel free to pop those over and we'll answer those. Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions, so we will wrap up today's webinar once again just by saying thanks again for joining us today. As I mentioned earlier,
Andy.
I will. Oh, yep. Go ahead.
I just noticed one that came up. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Okay. Nope, I couldn't see it.
Yeah, can you touch on global deletes, changes, adds? Yeah, briefly. I mean, obviously that could be a whole webinar or whole like 3-day training in and of itself, depending on what you want to do. But under admin, if you have security rights, you can access global change, global add, global delete. You might use global change for something like the city fields that we were looking at. So if you had a lot of records instead of the just 2 that I had in my example, then instead of cycling through manually, you might want to globally change Yellow Spring to Yellow Springs or whatever the case may be. So it's under admin, and anything in that area, anything to do with global changes and deletes, always, always, always have a valid, restorable backup of your data before you start that. For global add, something that you might use it for is starting a new event. So we mentioned that you can copy from an existing event to create a new event record and start to register people to that event, but the participants don't come over from year to year. So if you know you're going to solicit the same audience as who attended your dinner last year to invite them to the dinner this year, that you could globally add all of those participants from the last year's event to the current year's event. Globally delete is something that I almost never use, even me. And it scares me too much. But it's useful if you have just done a global add, for example, and realize that you didn't do it correctly, then you could turn around and globally delete that segment. But that's almost the only example that I personally have ever used it for.
Great, Dave. Thanks for asking that question, Martha. Sorry I missed that when you first popped that over. If anybody has anything else, we still have another minute or two. If we want to go ahead and take up all the allotted time, that's fine. Feel free to shoot something over, and we'll answer that here over the next minute or two. Well, it does look like that is all of the questions we have for today's eFocus series webinar. So I wanted to thank everybody again for joining us. And I will be sending out a follow-up email along with a link to the recorded webinar along with a download for the PowerPoint presentation that you can look at your leisure. Also, we'll let you know we'll be having another eFocus series webinar for Razor's Edge coming up in March. So look for an email in a couple weeks, once again with a reminder to register, and we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks a lot, everyone. Once again, happy Valentine's Day.